Just shout out to Dana. She is our behind the scenes guru, but we couldn't do these things without her. So really appreciate her being on. I'm so glad to see so many of you here. Hope you all had a little break over the holidays and that went well and that your new year is off to a great start. This is always a pretty busy time, especially for work-based learning professionals as we work to maybe onboard some new students or make sure things are set up. So thank you for taking some time to join us today. I'm really excited with what we have on the plan today for the webinar. So I think you're going to get a lot of great information today. Before we jump in, oh, and just I guess I should introduce myself if you don't know me. I'm Jan Jardine. I currently serve as the ACTE Work-Based Learning Division Vice President, but I'm also a work-based learning coordinator out in Utah. So I do feel what you're going through because I'm doing the same thing right now. Just wanted to share a little bit of information. So these webinars, this is our 6th year doing monthly webinars. They have really been such a great resource. This is the calendar of what we've done throughout the year and what's coming. So if you want to scan that QR code, you can get this full list. I also forgot to mention on this opening slide, that QR code that you see in the bottom right corner, that will take you to a Google Doc that has all of the links that you might see in the slides that I'm going to share. A lot of great resources. I'll also throw that link in the chat so that you can access that document for later. But really useful, a lot of information. Exciting things are happening in the work-based learning division. So you can see we have 4 more webinars after this one to finish up this school year. So lots more great things to come. I also wanted to just do a little push for the newest offering from the Work-Based Learning Division called the Leadership Alliance for Work-Based Learning. We unveiled this new leadership program at our division opening session at Vision in Nashville. We've seen a great response so far. We'd love to have you join us. So this is a year-long cohort program where work-based learning professionals ready to take their leadership to the next level can join us for some in-person sessions at the 2026 and 2027 work-based learning conferences, as well as some virtual sessions and some project work that we'll do throughout the course of that year. So if you're interested, that QR code or the link in the document that I just shared will give you all of the details and requirements. Those applications need to be submitted by January 30th, and we'll be selecting 10 work-based learning professionals for this cohort. So we are super excited about the opportunity this is going to give us to connect with more of you and to really, as a group, elevate work-based learning. So if you have any questions about that, go ahead and put those in the chat or just send me an email. I'm happy to answer those questions. I also want to do some promotion for our Work-Based Learning Conference 2026. This is always the highlight of my year. I love seeing all of you. I love connecting and learning from work-based learning professionals from across the nation. So we hope you'll join us. It's April 29th to May 1st. We'll be in Providence, Rhode Island this year. Registration is open. The website has information about tours and workshops that are happening pre-conference, and session information will actually be added to that, or a link to Sched will be added within the next month. So lots of information already out there, but registration is open and ready to go, so you can make sure you get a spot. It's going to be awesome. So with that, I am going to turn the time over to Alicia. And just a reminder, Alicia will take about 30, 35, 40 minutes to share, and feel free to be interactive in the chat and if you have questions and things as she presents. And then when she finishes, we'll turn off the recording and we'll take some time for a deeper dive if people want to stay on and ask additional questions and we can learn from each other. That's kind of the shift for our mentoring that we've done this year. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Alicia.
Thanks, Jan. Welcome, everyone. Let me just get my slides up. Okay, so it's great to be here with all of you this afternoon. And as Jan said, I do not want this to just be me talking. As we were brainstorming how we might approach this session, I really want to hear your challenges and solutions in these areas so that we can share good ideas and populate things that might be working in one place over to other places. So when Jan came to me with this topic about mastering work-based learning and overcoming challenges, I started thinking about all of the challenges that exist in your work-based learning programs, and you all could probably develop a whole list of challenges you're facing, whether that's transportation or scheduling or business partnerships or student preparation, or the list could go on. But in my role at the national level, for those of you who don't know me, my background is federal policy, and that's where I spend a significant amount of my time. So I thought today we would approach the challenge conversation from the lens that I often work in, which is that kind of policy and advocacy lens. And we know that policy, funding, some of these pieces can help to solve a lot of those challenges you're facing. So that's how we're going to kind of frame the conversation this morning. Or this afternoon, morning, I guess, for some of you still, depending on how far away you are. But I want to start by sharing a little bit of that national context around work-based learning, what we're hearing here in the federal space, as well as kind of from other national organizations about work-based learning. And I'll start out by saying work-based learning is getting more attention than ever from policymakers, from national organizations. Practically every day, I see a new organization writing about work-based learning, from educators, from business leaders, and the list goes on. And work-based learning is often suggested as a solution, or sometimes the solution, to many of the education and workforce development challenges that come up in these national conversations. And I think, 90% of the time, that's a great thing, right? Like, we want more attention for work-based learning. We want more students to have access to high-quality work-based learning programs. We want people to see work-based learning for all of the positive things that we in CTE have known kind of forever that work-based learning provides. But there are times where this can be a little bit challenging. The first place it's challenging is that all of that attention is not necessarily translating into funding and policies that address those challenges that you're having on the ground. Sometimes it is, and we're going to talk about some of those today. But at other times, it's, we need more work-based learning, but there's no support in place to actually make that happen. I think the other challenge, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we kind of go through the discussion, is that with all of this attention and pressure, there are a lot more people interested. There are a lot more players, and they don't all understand the real purpose of work-based learning, its connection to education, the way it connects to other experiences that students might have in the career development continuum. Some of those pieces that are really important to ensuring we are not just offering any type of work-based learning, but that we're offering students high quality experiences. So in that context, the first thing I thought we would talk about from a challenge standpoint is that funding piece. Um, what are some of the common sources of funding? Where should we tap new sources? And then I want to talk a little bit about advocating for your programs and for more funding for work-based learning programs. So so let's start with common funding sources for work-based learning. So I'm going to share a few at the federal level, but then be thinking, because I'd love for people to jump in with state or local specific sources of funding that you're using for your programs. So what we see at the federal level is that Perkins is often used for supporting work-based learning programs. That is obviously ACTE's primary source of federal funding, but there are other opportunities as well. One of those is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESSA, particularly Title IV of that piece of legislation, which is the Student Success and Academic Enhancement Grants. That bucket of funding under ESSA, has language about being able to be used for career development activities, work-based learning, very intentionally, as does Title I of ESSA. And so there are opportunities to tap into those pots of funding as well. And then over in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA youth dollars in particular can be used in some cases to support work-based learning programs, particularly summer jobs programs for students that qualify under WIOA. And so I think at the federal level, many policymakers look first to Perkins to support work-based learning, but we know that you can't do everything with the limited amount of money that school districts get from Perkins. So we hope that some of these other sources are helping programs as well. And we're always looking for new ideas for what we might be able to do at the federal level as well. But I'm curious about any of you that have state. Let's start with state sources. Is anybody willing to share funding at their state level that might be available to support work-based learning programs for students?
This is Cleland McCrory, and I was going to say in Kansas, we do get 0.5 funding for students that take a work-based learning class. And they can be gone from the school 2 periods during the school day, but they get the weighted funding for one of the 2 periods. Then the other period counts for attendance.
Okay, that's great. So weighted funding, is that from your state Department of Education?
Yes, that's funded by the Kansas legislature, the 0.5 CTE state weighted funding. But
That's great. Thank you for sharing. There's a couple examples in the chat too. Mike mentioned some service co-ops in Minnesota. Christina said they're working with their local workforce council on available grants. So that would be how using some of that Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding, I'm guessing, that has made its way down to the local level. So that's great. And Jan, thank you for sharing about the Catalyst grant in Utah and some general funding in Hawaii. Have any of your states, one thing we hear a lot about are incentives on the business and industry side to participate in work-based learning. So perhaps a tax incentive for a business to accept an intern or an apprentice or a youth apprentice. Is anybody in a state that has attempted something like that that's willing to share?
Georgia has something similar to that. It's think it was a 16 bill HB 402, and it gives employers a it's capped, but it's a discount on their umbrella workers' compensation policy for
Okay,
hiring
that
students in work-based learning. I don't think it's specific. It has to be in a field that is an exemption from a hazardous occupation. I think it could just be anywhere, but it was designed to help incentivize people to hire kids in those specific hazardous occupations that students are exempt from in work-based learning.
and that's great. I actually have not seen that. The workers' comp and the liability issues are another big challenge. So kind of attaching the funding to that's a great model.
Alicia, this is Cleela again from Kansas. We have two nonprofit organizations that I've offered business industry work-based learning experiences, internships. One of them is AGC of Kansas, which offers construction and ag type construction internships for the building industry. And then the other one is Kansas Hospital Association that will help arrange internships for students across Kansas. And, Kansas is known for having the highest per capita rate of hospitals in the nation. So that's a really good way when you look at the cluster model. Most of the career clusters are found in a community hospital.
Yeah, that's great. Using those public or kind of quasi public, some hospitals are private, some are public, depending on where you are, but using those entities that are a big part of your community. I see Jessica in the chat mentions that Hawaii is doing that with Department of Education as well. Let's see some other great examples in the chat. Stacy, thanks for sharing. Louisiana just passed the tax incentive for businesses who host interns, just went into effect January 1. I think that note, Stacy, that you have about we don't have details yet. That's the case in a lot of places. I think there could be interest in replicating some of these policies at the federal level, but we need to be able to show that they actually work and increase opportunities. So all of you who have shared examples or place things in the chat about programs starting or about to start, we'd love to have those examples as they continue on. So a lot of this funding only comes from advocacy and kind of really talking to policymakers, sharing, whether it's from the education side or the business and industry side. So I wanted to share a few resources that you might find useful in tapping into federal funding for work-based learning, or replicating some of these things that might be happening in other states, in your own states. The first is a piece from Education Commission of the States. They're an organization we work pretty closely with to monitor state policy. They have a report on state financial incentives for work-based learning, and I'll make sure that Jan gets these slides so that she can share them. Yes. However, the normal process is, I see she just dropped in the chat that they'd be available on the ACT website. So you'll have all these links. The next two things I want to share are actually ACT resources. We have a page on our website of fact sheets. These are all about CTE, return on investment, different tools that you might use in conversations with policymakers about increased funding for programs. And then the last resource kind of in this space is our CTE Policy Watch blog. If you all are not getting those blog posts or seeing those blog posts regularly, you can go to the blog, and there's a box right up on the right hand side of the screen where you can subscribe by email and have those blog posts delivered to your inbox every day that we've posted one. on the blog, we talk about what's happening in federal policy with things like Perkins funding and funding for other major education and workforce legislation. We also share any new grants that become available from the federal government. And with work-based learning being such a hot topic, there are often, opportunities for funding from smaller programs that could help support work-based learning programs as well. So kind of continuing on the theme, funding is technically policy as well, but broadening the conversation to think about other policy supports that are needed, and what should be a priority in our advocacy efforts around work-based learning, specifically within the broader context of CTE. So we know that there are federal policies. Many of you just shared state policies in the chat of things that your state is doing to support work-based learning. And then, of course, at the local level, you have policies in place as well. But I think on this topic, what I'm really interested in is where are there gaps in the policy framework that you're using for work-based learning? Where could public policy at the federal level or the state level, or even something that could be modeled and replicated in local school districts, be helpful for you as educators in work-based learning programs? Does anybody have any thoughts? If you could wave a magic wand and the federal government could do one thing to help your programs besides give you more money, which we know would be helpful, what change or what new policy or incentive would be helpful to your programs?
Alicia, I think one thing that would be helpful would be kind of a template, if you get my point, of expectations for people who take work-based learning people, as well as, so it's kind of a three-way, the one that's overseeing it, the entity that's taking them, and the student. Everybody felt like that they had a pretty good understanding of what each person's role is and what you're going to get out of this experience, and what other things, maybe options they could take and tap into, that kind of thing. I think that would make a higher quality work-based learning experience.
Okay, great. So some guidance on clear expectations for all the different players in the work-based learning work. I see tax incentives popping up again in the chat. A question for you all. Obviously, policy can be directed toward business, like in the tax incentives or things. It could be directed toward the educators. Do you find in your work that if we're thinking about policy solutions, we need more targeted toward the employers that are providing the work-based learning, or do you need more support and guidance on the education side, for preparing students for those experiences, for managing those experiences from the education side? Is there one that kind of weighs out over the other in your experiences?
I personally think that the employer side is more important, because if we make sure that employer feels comfortable taking our students and that it's a win-win for both of us, then they're more likely to step up and do that. I know just with the work with AGC of Kansas, in Kansas, once I laid out some things with contractors, they said, oh, well, we could do that, and here's something you could do that would help us, so we'd be more willing to take students from schools. So I'm just throwing that out as a thought.
And I agree with you, Celia, on that. having with the employers because we need them. We can make it a win-win, let them know it can benefit us as well as the
Mhm.
community. In addition, Celia had mentioned about resources for the employers. Maybe have a workbook, a handbook, like a probably majority of states, but I know in New York we do have a handbook for the teachers, for the employers, for the school, for the community. So this way, everyone understands the entire process, and it makes it easier for us to be a partnership.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. And I see some comments that agree in the chat as well.
And one thing that happened was one of the people from AGC stepped up to really educate the legislators on what they could do to take and reduce the risk for employers taking students with the insurance thing. And so it was kind of like, oh, schools can tap into this rider and this is how you do it, and got the insurance companies on board and that kind of thing. So I mean, I think that that's some of those kind of things that just getting all the players to know how each component needs to work together.
Yep. I'm interested, the comment in the chat about age requirements being a huge roadblock. Ruth, I don't know if you're able to come off mute, but if you are, could you say a little bit more about those challenges for you?
Well, some of right now, for example, we're working with a student who's very interested in an apprenticeship as an EMT, and you have to be actually, so there is some leeway there because you can do some of the training and whatever as when you're 17, but the license requires you to be 18 and it requires you to be a high school graduate or have a GED. And what are we supposed to do with that?
Right.
That's
Has anyone,
that's an example.
yeah, no, that's a great example. Thank you. And it looks like Lynette mentions another kind of patient care experience in California. Has anybody found solutions to that? Working around those age limits. I know there's some OSHA exceptions in some career spaces. I think that's some of what Jason was talking about, some of those hazardous occupations. But I, I don't know if anybody's found a solution to the healthcare one.
I also want to say, so we have found EMT companies that would take our students and have them work in the office, but then the competencies then are not EMT competencies that they're achieving, so it doesn't work for an apprenticeship.
I can speak. Can y'all hear me? This is Stacy from Louisiana. I can speak to the healthcare one a little bit.
Yeah, that's great.
So we have since COVID, it's been especially hard because before COVID, we did have high school students in all of our hospitals. Um, of course, they're mostly job shadowing. Nobody's really going to let them, hands on a patient, but they were able to like wheel patients in wheelchairs, maybe give them ice in the post-surgery room, but that all changed for obvious reasons. So one thing that we have had happen this semester, this year, I should say, which is wonderful, is we had the same challenges everyone else says. The hospital cannot hire because we want our interns to be paid. They can't hire anyone under 18. It puts them on their liability. It puts them under their malpractice, all of that stuff. So we developed a contract with our local hospital. They have reached out to all of their clinics and labs and all of that, asking who would like an intern. And they are going to pay the interns, but what they're doing is they're paying the school system through their charitable foundation just a stipend for each student. That way, we're running it as a pure internship. They don't actually work for the hospital. They don't actually, although they do have direct patient facing activities to do every single day, they're not, falling under it. That's a lot of the problem with hospitals, I think, is their own insurance and their own liabilities. And since we kind of take that on for them and they're cycling the payments through their charitable foundation, not their actual funding stream for employees, it did make a difference for them.
Thank you for sharing that. That seems like a good model to work around that, requirement of the insurance. And there's a few other examples in the chat as well, from states that have been able to do that. Also, let's see, Miranda, you mentioned some work in youth apprenticeship. Are you willing to share any more about that if you're able? I know some people might be driving or in class.
I can share just a little bit from what I've gathered through the youth apprenticeship in Wisconsin. There's an index of prohibited work, so work that is obviously restricted by employment, but then through a lot of the student labor laws, there's work permits allowed to kind of contradict a little bit of that restricted employment. So, meaning that it provides students an opportunity as long as they're 16 and over to work as long in a quote unquote hazardous environment, as long as there's proper safety situations and equipment put in.
Thank you for sharing. So it seems like kind of a combination of some of the work that's going on in states to build those pipelines and connections and identify, appropriate tasks, along with policies to solve the liability issue. Kind of both of those things that seem like they need to work together. Jason, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I would just say that regarding the 18-year-old thing, I think that's obviously an issue. But in my experience, traditionally, what's happened is the employers have conflated legal compliance with traditional practice. And so they'll say, oh, we can't hire a kid who's 18, but they haven't had the conversation about the workers' compensation policy and the OSHA compliance. Like there really aren't any things that restrict age in those categories. It's typically just traditional practice. And they've conflated that with legal compliance. And so once you have that conversation with them and you realize, and they still may say, no, we just don't want to hire a kid. That's a whole different conversation. But they need to understand that with the exception of a few specific instances and things that are classified in the hazardous occupations, it's usually just traditional like compliance, and they think that's law because that's what they always done. But once that conversation's had, at least they're clear. We may not want to do it, but don't use it. Don't use it legal compliance as an excuse. It's not really what it is. It's that just the way they've always done it.
I think that's a great point. I think we see that throughout CTE and the education system in general. Like there's lots of things that may not actually be required, or maybe they are, but the opposite thing is being done because of tradition or whatnot. Well, thanks for all those great examples. The next resource I wanted to share kind of wraps up that policy conversation as a way for you to hear more about what other states are doing and how they're using policy to solve some of these challenges. Some of the examples that you all mentioned would be profiled in this report. Every year, ACTE puts together with our partners at Advanced CTE a state policy year in review. And so we look back at the previous year and every piece of legislation, executive order, state board policy, anything formal like that was enacted the previous year related to CTE gets captured in this report. The image here is last year's report, but our 2025 report will be coming out in February, and there is a webinar on March 5th that gives you an overview of all of those policies. Work-based learning has been heavily featured in state policy all across the country over the past few years, and some of the new policies are things like the tax incentives that people were dropping in the chat, or the new grant funding. Some of them are more these kind of workaround things where, they've changed their child labor laws, or they've changed, liability policies around work-based learning. So I'm actually going to switch my screen share and show you this state policy tracker that was linked on that slide because it is a really cool database of all of these state policies. And I think a lot of people don't realize this is available for you all to look through. So this the link is really long, which is why I didn't actually paste it in the slide. But when you get a copy of the slides, you can go to, and I'll actually drop it in the chat. It should work there. I think that should work to take you directly to the tracker that goes along with the report that gets released every year. And so in this tracker, you can find policies that have been passed in your state and other states. You can search by year. You can search by whether they're secondary, post-secondary, adult, middle school, kind of the full gamut. And then you can search by these categories. And one of the categories is industry partnerships and work-based learning. So I'm going to just go through and look at all states who passed policies in 2025 around any of these systems and work-based learning. And so you can see here, it pulls up, a long list of policies that have been enacted in different states. And as advocates, you can look at what's happening in other states and maybe, we've got lots of people from all across the country on this call. If you see something that's of interest, connecting to other people in the division to find out more, connecting to your state associations to talk about advocacy for some policies. One of the things state legislatures love to do is copy best practices from other states. In a legislative session, we'll often see, one state passes, a bill, and then it gets picked up in another state, and another state, and another state. Sometimes those are good things. Sometimes those are not so good. But knowing what's happening in other states, being able to replicate some of those policies can show you some of the creative ways that states are addressing federal policy. Work-based learning policy. So let me go back. So just one last thing I wanted to share as we wrap up, and then I turn it back over for the rest of your conversation. I wanted to go back to this conversation from the beginning about kind of the intense focus and attention on work-based learning, particularly in the policy space. One of the challenges that we're facing at the federal level is that everybody wants a piece of work-based learning, and everybody thinks they know the best way to deliver work-based learning, or that their organization or institution has, the best work-based learning program. And a lot of the organizations that are kind of knocking at the door are not connected to the education system in a robust way. They are third-party, agencies. They are after-school programs. They're community-based organizations, and all of those institutions have a role in this broader work-based learning system, but they're not all necessarily doing the same thing or serving students in the same way. And so we're working really hard at the federal level to try to protect the quality of the work-based learning experience as something that links education and career experiences, and thinking about how we can ensure that program quality doesn't decrease as attention on work-based learning grows. We don't want, every different organization that might be interested kind of putting up a flag and saying we're offering work-based learning if it's not providing students with a quality experience. So I'm curious if any of you are having that challenge in your states or in your school districts, kind of related to this topic as attention grows. Anybody run into any issues?
I'm just going to speak up because of some conversations that have happened just this week. I think um, you hit the nail on the head when you said so many people are wanting a piece of this, and that's what we're finding in Utah is that we need to really tighten definitions and make sure we're all on the same page so that our data really reflects the experiences that our students are able to have. So that's been one of our challenges with the increased focus on work-based learning.
Jen,
Yes, I think.
I think I was gonna say real quick to what Jen just said. Um, that's also one of the main reasons we're creating that leadership alliance is to unify and elevate some of that common terminology, not just within states but across the country, because states are so specific and customized to how they do it. It's hard to create a uniform language across that. So that's one of the reasons we're really excited about that national leadership alliance for work-based learning that we're creating.
I think that's a great strategy. And your question in the chat, Jason, about is a lot of it a money grab? I think yes, not all of it. I mean, there are lots of organizations that care about serving youth and building connections and running good programs, but um, may not be connected in the same way. But in a lot of other cases, yes, it is. When a lot of and this happens with any federal program. When STEM was kind of the hot topic at with policymakers at the federal level and in states, I see your comments, Seth, in the chat about like everybody puts that acronym in their product or something so that it can get in front of more people or be more marketable. And I think we're seeing that with work-based learning as well. The last resource that I wanted to share up on this slide is pointing to exactly what Jan and Jason were talking about being very clear about terminology and what it means. We have a fact sheet on our website that's called What is Work-Based Learning, talks about the work-based learning continuum. At the time, work-based learning leaders from ACTE helped us review it. It was published a few years ago. If you all look at it now and decide it needs updating again, we're happy to do that, to help as the field evolves. I think many of your states have state work-based learning continuums. I think those are really important to use. And if you don't think they're reflective of what should be happening, to start dialogue around those continuums. And then I also want to mention our ACTE high quality CTE framework. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's a 12 element framework that is a research based look at what a high quality CTE program of study should include. One of those elements is work based learning, and there are 9 or 10 criteria for what that work based learning within the CTE program should look like. Things like that have been mentioned here, like, students having a plan and, a program to prepare the employer and, all the different kind of pre and post activities that make a program successful. So that's another place that we can point to for some common language about what high quality work-based learning looks like. Yes, I can paste. Oh, hold on. I think I can. I will grab it off the website. My slide won't let me copy it without advancing, but let me grab that link off our website for you. So that's a link to the framework. It has lots of tools and resources, not just around policy and advocacy, but implementation as well. For the framework, when we originally developed it, there's a self-evaluation that goes with it, and we correlated scores on the self-evaluation to Perkins data that school districts and colleges that participated in the pilot made available to us. We used data on graduation rates, technical skill attainment and completion, because those were the measures that were the most standard across the learner levels that we were using in the pilot. So that the idea behind the framework was that implementing programs that had all these elements would lead to higher outcomes. So with that, let me put my email up on the screen. I'll also drop it in the chat as well. I am always happy to answer questions or to dig in more. I really appreciate you sharing all these ideas and resources and thoughts in the chat. I'm going to download it, Jan. Maybe there's something we can do with everything that people shared as well that would be helpful. I'll have to think about what that might be, but it was great to be able to share and discuss with you all today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alicia. And I love that idea. There is so much good that is in the chat and from what we've done. So thank you, Alicia, for taking the time to share. And thank you everyone on the call for being willing to share what you're doing and the work that's happening in your area and the challenges that you're facing. That helps us on the national level to see where our focus can be to make the most impact for all of you. So thank you for that. Just a couple of things before we turn off the recording and transition into our deeper dive. Thank you again for joining us for the webinar today. Just another reminder, if you want to join us for future webinars, all the information is here. And if you have ideas or suggestions, things that we should consider including in our webinar series for future years, please let us know. You can email Saf Espinoza. She is our Work-Based Learning Division Professional Development Chair. She spearheads putting all of this together. So shout out to Saf and that PD committee. I put the QR code there again for that link document that has all of the links to everything that we've shared, including links to register for the remaining webinars for the year, link to apply for the Work-Based Learning Leadership Alliance, and a myriad of other things. So with that, we will stop the recording and transition into our deeper dive.